Szanowni Państwo, dziś mam przyjemność polecić kolejną książkę naszego patrona, wydawnictwa Deregio, pod tytułem Prawdziwy Izrael, fałszywy judaizm, autorstwa księdza Jeana-Michel Gleize. Jest to, można by powiedzieć, teologiczny i filozoficzny tour de force o tym, czym jest judaizm, o jego esencji, metodą scholastyczną, prowadzenie ku prawdzie bez żadnej politycznej poprawności i zbędnych, że tak powiem, ekumenizmów. Tę książkę i inne znajdziecie w linku wydawnictwa Deregio, który to link jest dzisiaj załączony w naszym programie. Polecam bardzo serdecznie. Dr Michał Krupa.
Hi guys, welcome again to another episode of DR Global, the English language podcast of Poland's largest conservative weekly, Do Rzeczy, although we do have a daily website also, which you can visit, dorzeczy.pl. Today is November 26th, the year of our Lord 2025. Guys, remember to hit that like and subscribe channel. It definitely helps us grow. Remember, you can also support our work by buying me and our producer and a whole team a coffee. The link is in the description box. And guys, I would be remiss also to mention our sponsor, Deregio Publishing House. As you know, Christmas is coming up. Deregio Publishing House, whose link you'll also find in the description box, has many great books, treats for the mind and the soul. You know, it might be that Christmas present for somebody in the family, a friend, or somebody who's seeking out a more rational perspective on the world around us. Deregio will definitely have something for you. That's obviously for our Polish readers. So make sure to check them out. The link is in the description box, and Deregio is doing one heck of a great job in the publishing of great books, which you can find online on their site. And guys, I'm very excited today because we have another great guest with us, the one and only Ian Proud. Ian Proud was a member of Her Majesty's Diplomatic Service from 1999 to 2023. Ian organized the 2013 G8 summit in Northern Ireland, which marked, by the way, Vladimir Putin's last visit to the United Kingdom. From July 2014 to February 2019, he was posted at the British Embassy in Moscow, where he advised UK ministers, among other things, on sanctions against Russia. He was also chair of the Russia Crisis Committee, director of the Diplomatic Academy for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and vice chairman of the board of the Anglo-American School of Moscow. He speaks Russian, which is something very rare among people who claim they're competent on Russia, as we all know, but Ian actually does speak the language, and is a fellow at the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. And two other interesting things that I actually read about Ian is that he bakes his own bread, very positive development, and second, that he's a fan of Southampton FC, who, by the way, kicked the living daylights yesterday out of Leicester 3-0. So Ian, I'd like to congratulate you on that beautiful win. As a Manchester United fan myself, I think that's a pretty good accomplishment, and hopefully we'll be seeing more of Southampton in the Premier League table. How are you this evening, sir?
Both Man U and Southampton are performing a bit better of late, which is a good sign for both of us. And my sourdough fad was very much started in lockdown. It's a lockdown project which I've continued to this day, and my wife and I very much enjoy fresh bread every week. I'm great, thank you.
Excellent.
Nice to talk to you. Nice to, saying it, I've only had a chance to visit Poland twice. Once when I drove back from Moscow at the end of my posting, I drove all the way through Ukraine, and I drove through Poland, coming out via Krakow, and I stayed in Wrocław overnight. And my sister-in-law is Polish, so yeah, I've got a lot of affection for your country.
Well, excellent. Hopefully sometime in the near future, we can hit up the pierogis and the other percentage-wise things if you were to come to Poland, because I know, I also forgot to mention in the introduction, we will have this in the link, also in the description box, but Ian has written an excellent book on his time in Moscow. It's called Misfit in Moscow, basically a tale of his experiences and the failure of British diplomacy, sadly, regarding Russia. That's all in the book. We'll have the link in the description box. And as I said, we're very happy to have Ian with us today because there is so much to talk about as we record today on November 26th. So Ian, I want to get right into it. First of all, there's so much commotion right now about the so-called 28 points which at one point became 19 points. Now they apparently came back to 28 points. The peace plan that was apparently proposed by the American side to the Ukrainians for review. The Ukrainians obviously reviewed it. They added some corrections. Then the Europeans, the sort of center of the European Union, came out with their own plan. Yesterday, we heard that they are now resigned to actually work on the basis of the American plan. We have Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, saying that, well, we haven't received any plan yet, but what I've seen so far, that could be a sort of basis for a future development. And all this commotion help us try and make sense of what's going on regarding this peace plan.
So what's happening is a negotiation that lots of people want to get involved with, particularly the Europeans, actually having sat outside of the process of negotiation since the start of the war. The peace plan is probably the wrong word for the paper. It's a starting point for negotiations. It sets out a list of issues that Ukraine, but also Russia, will need to sign up to deliver peace. And there's some quite tricky issues in there. The biggest one obviously being about Ukraine revoking its aspiration to join NATO, which is probably the biggest sticking point, particularly for Russia, but also for Ukraine in agreeing to peace. If Trump can land that, if he can get Ukraine to accept military neutrality, which actually Zelensky said is willing to do at the start of the war, if you recall, before the Istanbul peace talks, then everything else, negotiation-wise, starts to become a bit easier. But the 28-point plan, it's a long list, lots of stuff in it, lots of stuff on the broader kind of global context in terms of arms control and non-proliferation. But actually, let's see where the negotiation ends up. Zelensky has to sign up to this, and Vladimir Putin does too. So it's a tough job. But I genuinely think, actually, that Trump is really focused on landing this deal now, having sort of got past the hard yards on Gaza.
Am I reading the tea leaves correctly in that Keir Starmer, your prime minister, who was one of the most vocal supporters of the current government in Kiev, first he supported the European modifications, but it seems now he made the point that they're going to be working on the basis of the American plan, which would seem like a win for Donald Trump if you consider that after Anchorage, the Europeans flocked to Washington and forced Trump to sort of, correct his own plan from just literally 48 hours back. Is that the sense that you're getting also, that Trump sort of might have pressured the UK this time to not stand up to him?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the UK is in a very weak position anyway. Starmer domestically is in quite a weak position right now, even though he enjoys a very large parliamentary majority. He's proving a very unpopular, prime minister in the UK. Big tax rises announced today in the budget, and actually there were three plans, if they call. I personally don't like the word plan because it's like a negotiating paper. But there was the American plan, which we seem to be coming back to, the 28-point plan. There was a 27-point plan, which European, German, French, and British national security advisors who were in Geneva amended to kind of make it more favourable to Ukraine. That's clearly been ditched. And then there's a European 24-point plan, which frankly was completely delusional. It was basically saying, well, we want to carry on exactly what we're doing now, and Trump has completely ignored that. And there was the 19-point plan where the Ukrainians probably took a lot of stuff out, and the Americans have put it back in again. But the key point is, I think Trump is really driving this now. I think he's getting frustrated that the Europeans are kind of resisting efforts to bring the war to an end, and Zelensky is resisting efforts to bring the war to an end, and he just now wants to force the issue, and I think that's where we are.
You're a former diplomat. You've seen these things inside and out. Have you ever seen a situation where, internal elements within a government, I'm referring right now to the American government, it seems are trying to sabotage this peace initiative? Because just in the last 24 hours, we've had leaks. I think they're reported by Bloomberg of discussions, apparent leaks. They seem genuine, of talks between Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy, and Dmitry Ushakov, who's Putin's aide on many of these serious issues. And then we had, I think, a pair of papers on Ushakov talking with Kirill Dmitriev. It would seem that some elements in the American deep state are desperate to stop this process and keep the war going. Is that the sense you're getting also?
Yeah, I mean, you must have been to DC, right? It's a very chaotic and divided kind of place, and people will be briefing against Trump's efforts to bring the war to an end. Of that, I'm absolutely sure, leaking documents and leaking recordings as they have. But nevertheless, I think that Trump is in a much stronger position now than he was back in 2017 at the start of his first presidency, where he had even less power, within the DC Beltway to kind of make things happen. And in fact, he was completely blocked in any efforts to kind of develop a better relationship with Russia during that time. I think he's in a much stronger position now than he was then, recognizing that he'll still face resistance, even within his own cabinet to getting a deal through. I think he's determined to do it, and he's in a stronger position now to deliver.
When you look at the Polish political scene from both sides, so I sort of call them the two factions of the solidarity movement. So the liberal side, which is the ruling party right now, broadly Donald Tusk, and the so-called conservative side, broadly Jarosław Kaczyński, Law and Justice. Both of these parties have this fixation that not only Atlanticism as a concept is still relevant in the current multipolar environment, but that Poland has a strategic interest in basing its security on very close ties with the United Kingdom. We saw this during the, I guess, the most kinetic phases of the Ukrainian-Russian war. There was even a partnership that was kind of signed between Poland and the UK. I think that was under Boris Johnson still. And, a lot of us historians, political scientists look at this and we see a sense of desperation in this because obviously, we all want to have good relations with the United Kingdom. However, hinging our security on a country that is, I'm sorry to say, such a mess right now. I mean, you've alluded to this a bit in terms of military policy, economic policy, the strength of its own government, that it seems a bit delusional at this point to rely on the United Kingdom as a sort of security bulwark against the so-called Russian threat. Can you give your analysis of why this is or why this isn't the case?
Well, I think we have really good historical ties between Poland and the UK. There's still a large Polish diaspora in the UK, not just sort of post downfall of the Warsaw Pact, but actually going back to the aftermath of World War II as well. Southampton, where I'm from, I believe, has or used to have the biggest Polish diaspora, strong sort of military connections. It's good that we have these ties, and we're both kind of significant NATO members, as well. So, but in terms of geopolitics, I mean, I'm not, I think actually our strength is more collectively within the NATO grouping sort of per se. I mean, neither Poland nor the UK has been willing to intervene militarily in the conflict in Ukraine for very, very different reasons. Both governments, for different reasons, domestically are in trouble. Keir Starmer, just because he seems to be a singularly ineffective, prime minister, our economy is in trouble. In Poland, you face a different set of challenge, but Donald Tusk's popularity seems to be continuing to sort of go downhill. He's not seen as performing very well. And Poland has this really kind of complex relationship with Ukraine, which on one hand, it wants to kind of, continue the war. Certainly, if you listen to people like Radek Sikorski, but Ukrainian future membership of the EU would not be in Poland's interests. So it's a complex, set of relationships. But I think actually for both countries, despite the positions that both governments take, actually peace in Ukraine would be beneficial, for different reasons to both countries. For Poland, obviously, because Ukraine is your neighbour. And for UK, because we can then focus on our own internal problems.
What would it take, in your opinion? Because, we know from the historical record that Boris Johnson was the one who sort of sabotaged the Istanbul peace talks. I mean, there's so much reporting on this and words from high-level people such as, the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, even the Ukrainian media reported on it. But You were a British diplomat in Moscow. If Where would be the starting point of a rebuilding of any semblance of even stability in these relations? Because a lot of people harken back to the Cold War sort of James Bond mentality, where the Brits and the Russians, they're always going to be on the opposite side of the conflict. However, in a multipolar world, and with the changes that occurred, Russia no longer being the Soviet Union, United Kingdom no longer being an empire, how would you go about rebuilding British Russian ties? Where would you even start? Because for a lot of us, it's a big head scratcher.
I'll start with the economic, social, and the cultural. I mean, the things that made Europe a success in the aftermath of World War II was a relentless focus on the economic, social, and the cultural, not the political. Ways to allow countries to kind of engage with each other without eroding their unique national identity. And I think that's been a problem for Russia's relations with every EU member state, frankly, since the war has started. That the over politicization of the Europe-Russia relationship has led us arguably to where we are today. So when I was in Russia, for example, even after the start of the Ukraine crisis, actually Russia still had quite deep economic links into Europe, and they were a moderating force in terms of the relationships. For example, the Finns had a very, very good relationship with Russia. The Germans had a good relationship, with Russia. The UK did. I mean, BP had a big stake in Rosneft. Cultural sort of ties were happening. Russians could fly to the UK. British people could fly to Russia if they wanted. It was actually beneath the politics. It was in many ways a very, very positive and healthy relationship. And it's that kind of state that we need to get back to. We need to basically ditch the politics and focus on the things that are much easier to agree upon, trading with each other, meeting each other, comparing cultures without trying to kind of homogenize culture across Europe, which has been the big failing of the European project.
Indeed. I mean, the football arena itself was a sort of arena where Russian-British cooperation was seen fairly well. I want to, sticking to the Ukraine issue still, I want to get your impression of going back to the Istanbul talks, because I mentioned Boris Johnson being a sort of saboteur of these discussions, but I've always wanted to get some insight into whether do you think it was a British initiative to dump these talks, or do you think the guiding hand, so-called, of Washington in the background sort of encouraged Boris to do what he did? Because if you consider how many people lost their lives after April 2022, I mean, if I was Boris Johnson, probably for the rest of my days, I wouldn't be able to sleep with a clean conscience at night. I mean, it's such a tremendous mistake what was done at that time.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson has been completely open about his role in scuppering the talks. I don't know why people even talk about it, because he's been quite clear that he discouraged Zelensky from taking the deal. And within just a few weeks, his foreign secretary, the equally disastrous Liz Truss, made a speech in Mansion House in which she encouraged Ukraine not only to retake the land that Russia had occupied since the war started, but to take all of the land that Russia had occupied since the start of the Ukraine crisis, including Crimea. So clearly, there was a very strong and very Russophobic and frankly very delusional thread within the UK in and of itself, partly reaching back in history, the history between our nations, of course. But of course, we never really do anything without the Americans. So of course, Boris Johnson was talking regularly with the White House as well, Biden's administration. And we were working in partnership. And Victoria Nuland was quite honest and said that she discouraged Zelensky from taking the Istanbul deal as well. So it was very much a double act. But that doesn't diminish the fact that the UK position was a very British position to take.
In this regard, there's a question that must arise, I guess. The status of the so-called special relationship between Washington and London. It would seem, as goes the old Cold War world, so also goes the so-called special relationship. As a Brit, what do you foresee for the future of relations between Washington and London? I mean, obviously, there's going to be the cultural ties, lingual ties, but I mean, the distinct nature of this special relationship, I think, has changed somewhat. What do you think?
I think this special relationship ebbs and flows over time. I mean, even though we're proximate with Europe, I mean, the US is still by far our biggest trading and investment partner in the world. We still have very strong military and intelligence links, historical links, of course, as well. And I think it will continue to ebb and flow. I don't think, I basically think any democratic government essentially dislikes Britain. And we have, generally speaking, better relations with Republicans. Trump is much more cool on us right now because most people in the British political establishment dislike Trump intensely. So I mean, that if the special relationship is cooling, it's for very specific British reasons. That actually there's a lot of Trumpophobia, here. But nevertheless, I mean, I've got a great affection for the US. I've been many, many times to the US, and I think that the Americans have a deep affection for us. They like our history, they like our royal family, and our soft power. So I mean, I think the realities of relationships are about people to people links. How well a president of the US and the prime minister of the UK get on is slightly immaterial to the kind of deep-seated kind of links that we have between our countries, and they're the most important thing. And I don't really see that changing. But what I do want to see is us getting back to kind of the strength of our links with European nations, because Europe is a group of different individual, very specific, very special sort of nations. And I think Brexit has slightly damaged that. I mean, I'm more in favour of Brexit now than I was perhaps before Brexit, possibly because of the centralising tendencies in Brussels. But I mean, I grew up in Germany. I've been to most countries in Europe. I've got a huge affection for Europe as a group of individual and unique states. And I think it's that relationship that we should focus on nurturing more now, frankly, than our relationship with the US.
In moving down south, I guess, the Gaza peace plan, which, or rather ceasefire, pardon me, which seems to be only imposed on one side, because we know, unfortunately, that Israel has killed a lot of people since the ceasefire was implemented. We know that Bibi Netanyahu is still in power. He has the still support of his radical members of the government. I'm thinking here about, Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. But there are discussions constantly about a return to hitting Iran while Netanyahu is still in power. And I want to get your sense of, do you think this time the Americans and the British will be more hesitant to support Netanyahu in any kinetic, actions towards Iran? Or are they just waiting for Bibi to say, I need you to back me up just like you did last time?
I just have never thought that it was even in America's strategic interest to kind of take on Iran, which is militarily a microscopically small power, against the United States of America. I mean, there's no obvious strategic driver for them to get into a war with Iran just to solve Israel's difficult relationship with Iran. And actually, there's even less of a strategic reason for the UK to get involved in any conflict with Iran. In fact, there's no reason for the UK to get involved in any conflict with Iran, at all. So I don't really see. I think people talk about a war with Iran. It's a ridiculous idea. Iran is big population, tiny military, tiny economy. I think actually the bigger difficulty with having a conflict with Iran is what that means for the wider kind of global South and how they view us in the West, in particular that Iran, as it moves closer towards the BRICS grouping, and that sort of thing, its relations with China, its relations with Russia, India, and that sort of thing. What would it say if the dying hegemon was trying to beat up on this small small country, for no other reason apart from to kind of support this, the leader of Israel whose hands are covered in blood.
On that score, I was wondering what you thought of Tony Blair all of a sudden popping up and being sort of brought back to the stage to play a role, I guess, in the management, the rebuilding of Gaza to a lot of people in the Middle East. I mean, Tony Blair, I think only George W. Bush and the late Dick Cheney are worse in that regard. I mean, that seems to be a PR blunder, no?
Well, against the general horrific nature of what's been happening in Gaza, it doesn't seem any worse than any other PR blunders on what's been happening there. Look, he's a political operator, and he's got this Tony Blair Global Foundation, whatever it's called. He's always trying to kind of work his way into kind of this peace settlement or that peace settlement. I mean, I personally see him as a completely discredited figure politically, and he's widely seen that way in the UK as well. But if there's an opportunity for him to sniff around an international role, he'll do it. I'm just amazed that people take him seriously. Frankly, I'm just amazed. But then I'm also amazed that people take Zelensky seriously. So, we make crazy choices in the international world.
Indeed. Going back to your experience in Moscow, there was an interview, actually not an interview, it was a statement made by the Polish president just a couple of days back, where he said regarding the 28 points that we discussed at the beginning, that, we're all for peace, but he said, we know that Putin's Russia can't be trusted. While a couple of weeks ago, our own President Navrosky, also said that the only man who can negotiate with Vladimir Putin is President Trump, which is interesting because, we as the Polish electorate, we elected our leaders to negotiate on our behalf, not to Donald Trump, for Donald Trump to negotiate on our behalf. That's kind of a paradox. But he did say that. And there seems to be this impression, I think, especially in Eastern Europe, unfortunately, that the Russians are this, devilish, agreement incapable players who will always try to sucker into a deal, then use you, then spit you out, that there is no such thing as diplomacy in Russia, and that the Russians are just waiting to screw you on some deal. Which, if you look at their global presence, I mean, they got so many arrangements, bilateral deals, trilateral deals, multilateral deals with so many countries, they don't seem to be screwing, large and small. And I was wondering, from your experience with Russians in Russia, the way that the Russian diplomatic corps behaves, your interactions with the Russians, is there any basis to this thinking in Poland that, oh my God, Putin's Russia can't be trusted? We have to either wait this out or continue the war? Because to me, it just seems it's ridiculous. What's your take?
Yeah, I agree with you completely that it's ridiculous. But, the Western media and political establishment like gaslights European citizens all the time about Russia. Like von der Leyen said, Putin's not interested in peace negotiations. And Zelensky says this all the time. Putin doesn't want this, and Putin's not interested in that. And Keir Starmer will say, well, these people aren't even talking to Putin. I mean, how would they even know that he's not interested? And yet people come out with this stuff all of the time. And Putin's going to invade Poland next, or he's going to invade Lithuania next, and all this nonsense, while at the same time they say he's only been able to make 1% gains over the past 3 years. So I mean, we're being constantly gaslighted with this nonsense. What I can tell you about the Russians is that they're very, very reciprocal in everything that they do. They're very, reciprocal. If you do something, then they'll respond. If they do something and you respond, then there'll be that kind of balance. I mean, they will make a deal with you if they feel that that deal is shared half and half between you. They're going to meet you halfway if you meet them halfway. I mean, the Russians are very reciprocal that way. And actually, we had some fantastic, relationships with them. And when you collaborate with the Russians on issues that are an issue, for example, that's important to them as it's important to you, then you'll find that they're a very easy partner to work with. Like, just after the Salisbury nerve agent attack in the UK, I had to rebuild the MC and staffing because a third of our staff had been kicked out by the Russians, but they still wanted to cooperate with us on football. Because England was playing, we had 32,000 England fans coming for it. We wanted to make sure that they were safe. The Russians wanted to make sure the World Cup was a success, and they were great partners to work with. I worked across Russia with different universities and stuff on different projects, and if you find something that's mutually beneficial, between you a project, and that's where the economic, social, and cultural always works, because the Russians love their cultural stuff and social engagement. They love all that, and if you find something mutually beneficial, they're great and actually surprisingly kind of convivial people to work with. In my experience, they really are, and that's a great shame of this. That we've kind of created this demon, cartoonish figure of the Russians, which I don't think is necessarily accurate. But the flip side, of course, is if you just try and force a deal on the Russians, they'll fight you harder than anybody, as we've seen in Ukraine. And it's the war or peace thing. I say. I mean, the Europeans don't want war with Russia, but they don't want peace either. And the Russians say, "What do you want? Don't complain that we're fighting you when you don't, want to make peace either."
Indeed. I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate at this point, just one of my final questions about the relations between Russia and the UK, because if you go back to, 2005, 2006, I mean, you had Litvinenko apparently killed by the Russian special services on UK soil. You had Boris Berezovsky apparently killed by Russian special services on UK soil. You had the Skripal affair apparently by the Russians on UK soil. And you had, those two goofy GRU agents who apparently killed Skripal, that they came back to Russia. So a lot of people would say, how can you have good relations with people who are assassinating, apparently, your own citizens, their own citizens on UK soil? That there is a basis for this, British Russophobia, at least at this time, against Moscow. There's always a question of, did the Russians really do this? And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a question regarding that. So what's your sense of these Russian intrusions onto British soil?
So my view is that when it comes to Litvinenko and Skripal in particular, that people directly or indirectly involved in the Russian state were responsible. I mean, that's just my view. Perhaps I've been disadvantaged by having access to too much inside information, but that's my view. But I mean, I think as I said before, Russians are very, very reciprocal, and even Russian insiders told us that actually that if you piss them off, then some Russian exile spends all the time bad mouthing Putin in another country. Then that's just what happens. I mean, that is just a Russian mindset to these things. There is that tough and brutal side to the Russians that you see through. I mean, they'd say it wasn't us, but I personally think it was them. But I mean, when it comes to our relationship, I mean, I think these things can easily derail, good relations. Because I mean, if you looked at it from the other side of the telescope, I mean, why were we letting all these kind of emigre Russians set up in our country, take all the money out of Russia, and spend all their time criticizing Putin from afar? I mean, if we want to know why the UK-Russia relationship was in a bad state, ask ourselves why we permitted this environment for Russian oppositionists who still today, try and create a government in exile, including from offices in London. So if the Russians have said, well, right, we're going to deal with that, well, you got to ask yourself the root cause. I'm not saying that justifies it, because clearly it doesn't justify it. But I mean, I think if we're working hard to build a positive relationship with Russia, then you don't find hear stories of Russian agents killing people in Saudi Arabia. You don't find stories of Russian agents killing people in China. Why is that? Because they have good relations with Russia. I mean, it's I believe that if we had more positive relations with Russia, then this sort of irritant wouldn't happen. I mean, all these cases of tragedy, of course, wouldn't happen. But yeah, it's just a picture of the relationship that we have, I'm afraid.
Well, it may be a truism, but diplomacy, I think you'd be an excellent lecturer to our diplomatic corps, because, they tend to not see diplomacy as the art of seeing the world as it is and adapting to the world, but rather we're seeing the world as we want it to be, and then trying to force it. Exactly. Just
it's
something that's...
diplomacy is about understanding people. I mean, sovereignty is the kind of the connecting tissue that makes kind of international relations work. And if this modern generation of diplomats that think they can go to sovereign countries. I mean, diplomats serve in foreign countries at the will of the receiving state. We have gratis visas, and we have complete freedom to operate within a country, and that country can remove that right at any time. As soon as a diplomat thinks they can go to a country and work there and disrespect the sovereignty of that country, criticize its government in public. You see what's happening in Georgia right now, for example. They've lost sight of what the purpose of diplomacy is. I mean, of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having difficult conversations with governments in countries where we have complex relationship, but these conversations should be happening in private, behind closed doors, and we should be seeking to understand them as they try to seek to understand us. And we've totally lost sight of the purpose of diplomacy, I think, across Europe, in Poland, I'm afraid to say, certainly in the UK, in Germany, and definitely in Brussels.
In other words, diplomats shouldn't be distributing cookies at anti-government rallies in other countries.
No, no. It shouldn't be standing outside the Georgian parliament saying, we should support the opposition. I mean, no, that's not what... diplomats exist to foster improved relationships between the country in which they're working in their own country. I mean, that is their core role. They're not there to kind of judge the nature of the government. They're not there to kind of promote a different government instead if they don't like the government they're serving. They're there to promote relations between their two countries, and that's it.
Hear, hear. Amen. Final question, Ian. Any predictions on where we might be at the end of the year in terms of going back to the war in Ukraine? Because we sit here on November 26th. Our interview will be published in the next couple of days, so we're not live. But it would be awesome to go back to this question soon and say we hit the nail on the head in terms of predictions. How do you think this whole Ukrainian episode will evolve in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think Trump is really going to try and force a deal, on Zelensky, and the Europeans will hate it, and they'll try and resist it. But I think if Zelensky signs up to that, then I think things will start happening very quickly. It's going to be very messy in terms of how to genuinely kind of maintain peace, along the line of contact in Ukraine. But I think as soon as the guns stop firing, if that's what happens, and as soon as NATO is taken off the table, which is the core thing here, NATO gets taken off the table, everything suddenly becomes much easier for Russia and the West. But Ukraine has a very, very difficult road ahead of it, starting with having elections whenever they're going to take place. So I think Trump is going to force a deal. NATO coming off the table is radically going to change the relationship. Difficulties in implementation, of course, but I think actually, European politicians, particularly in Germany, Poland, France, and the UK, are then going to have to struggle to explain to their electorates why we'd said all along that A, we'd beat Russia, and B, Ukraine would join NATO, and they won't be able to have the answers to that. And Tusk will fall in 2027, as will Macron. Merz will fall in 2029, as will Starmer. You heard it here first.
Well, spoken like a true realist, indeed. Guys, as I said, we have the links to Ian's book in the description box, also on his X account, which we encourage you to follow. Ian, thank you once again for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to get more of your analysis in the next couple of weeks and months here on DR Global. Thank you once again, sir.
All the best. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye-bye.